Welcome everyone to DerekJ Speaks, and today we are doing a movie review for The Batman 2022, the latest entry into the Batman filmology, I guess you can call it. It's a brand new take on this legendary character that has been seen countless times in the past few decades on the film, on the big screen, on television. Many directors, many actors who have put on the cape and who have brought this character to life. And now, here in 2022, we have a new portrayal of the character presented from director Matt Reeves, and of course, the new Batman played by Robert Pattinson. The synopsis reads: Batman ventures into Gotham City's underworld when a sadistic killer leaves behind a trail of cryptic clues. As the evidence begins to lead closer to home and the scale of the perpetrator's plans become clear, he must forge new relationships, unmask the culprit, and bring justice to the abuse of power and corruption that has long plagued the metropolis. So this film has been hyped up big time for the last few years. I remember long ago, it was back in 2019, when it was first announced that Robert Pattinson would be cast as the Batman in a new solo Batman film. And there were many people who were up in arms about it and who just could not imagine it. They could not see it. They couldn't get on board with it. But shockingly, there was a large number of defenders of Robert Pattinson, and I would put myself in that category, who looked at his career and looked at his abilities post Twilight and saw that and thought to themselves, you know what? I'm willing to give it a chance. I'm willing to see how this plays out. And now we saw how it played out with this film. But over the years, and then the pandemic hit, so this film got pushed back a little bit, but the anticipation was building for it. We saw the trailers, some excellent trailers for this movie, and everything finally culminating with this film being released in theaters now. And my initial thoughts is I really liked this movie. I didn't love it. I didn't love this movie, but I came really close to loving it because I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun, which is not, this isn't really a fun movie. It is very dark, very dreary, very disturbing and depressing at times. So it's not exactly a fun flick for the whole family. In fact, please do not take your kids to see this movie. Just because it's Batman and it does not mean it's very appropriate for young children. But I did enjoy watching this movie. I'm a big Batman fan. I previously did a review for Spider-Man No Way Home on the channel, and I talked about my love for the Spider-Man character in film, in the comics, on TV. The Batman's very similar. I have not had an extensive history of reading the comics for the Batman. Different certain ones here and there, but Batman the Animated Series, of course, many of the films, the Burton films, seeing the Schumacher films, none of which are really all that good, but I saw them when I was really young, so I have a warped view of them. Of course, the Christopher Nolan trilogy with Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, and Dark Knight Rises. Really like Batman Begins. The Dark Knight is one of my all-time favorite movies in general, and The Dark Knight Rises I thought was a very weak film within that series. And of course, recently we had Ben Affleck as Batman in the DCEU in Batman v Superman, and of course Justice League, the Joss Whedon version, the Snyder Cut version, whatever version and iteration of Ben Affleck the Batman that you want. I thought he did a pretty good job at it. And talking about those previous ones, Michael Keaton, in my opinion, is still one of the best Batman we've seen in film. Val Kilmer, that movie was chopped and edited down. There's a completely different cut that shows just how great he truly was as Batman. But even still, I thought he did a good job. George Clooney, the less said about that, the better. And of course, the animated series with Kevin Conroy doing the voice. You can't go much better than that. So, Robert Pattinson as the character. I'll get more into how I felt about him as Batman, but just my initial thoughts on the movie itself, I thought it was really good. And with the hype level that was around it, I thought it lived up to a lot of that, at least for me. And a lot of the hype that I had and a lot of the expectations that I put on this movie, whether fairly or unfairly, there's a certain expectation that one would have as a Batman fan going to see a Batman movie. And I think they did a very good job of living up to those expectations, all the while taking this character into new directions and making certain changes that made sense within the world and universe that they built up here. So, director Matt Reeves, seen him direct several movies, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, War of the Planet of the Apes, those recent Planet of the Apes films. I'm a big fan of all of them, so I think he did a wonderful job with those. And of course, he directed other films like Let Me In and Cloverfield. So there's a certain style that he has as a director that I believe was on display in this film. He also discussed in interviews and such that he had inspirations from films like Chinatown in creating the world and atmosphere of this movie. You could see a little bit of previous Batman movies influence this. We saw little shades of The Dark Knight in there, Christopher Nolan's Batman films. We saw some of the 89 Batman movie with Michael Keaton, just in terms of the world and the mood and the atmosphere of the film, particularly with how Gotham is shown and presented as a city itself. The city of Gotham, when done right, can be presented as a character in and of itself. And I thought that it was shot well and it was presented in a way that was very appealing and really added to the story. So many of the characters in this movie I would like to talk about, and of course there's no one better to talk about first than Batman himself, Robert Pattinson. I thought Pattinson's take on the Batman was very good. He's not my favorite Batman, but I liked his portrayal of the character. A very dark, very brooding version of him, which that's dark and brooding. Those are like peanut butter and jelly as far as any typical Batman portrayal. But he had his own spin on it. It was a much more reserved version of this character. And within this world, we see this Batman. He is very inexperienced. He is very early on in the stages of his Batman run. I believe they even said in the film, at least at one point, Jim Gordon talked about how he's known him for 2 years. So you assume that by this point in time, he has been Batman for around 2 years. So not very long that Bruce Wayne has been Batman within this world. And you can tell in certain points, but by other points, you can tell in just he has such a unique take on this character. So Batman was really good. Bruce Wayne, I was not the biggest fan of Pattinson's portrayal of Bruce Wayne early on in the movie. I did like the approach that they took of him being very quiet, very shut off from the world, because he's giving it his all as Batman. We see a lot of Batman in this film, which is not very common for most Batman movies. You know, shockingly, in a lot of these Batman movies, we don't see a whole lot of Batman in the movie itself, but we see a good amount of him in the costume, under the mask, throughout the entire movie, and we don't see a whole lot of Bruce Wayne. And the times we do see solely Bruce Wayne, at least early on, it was the slowed down the movie a bit for me, and I was just waiting, okay, I'm ready for Batman to come back on the screen. But later on, when we see more backstory of Bruce Wayne and we see truths uncovered about the Wayne family, which I'll get into a bit. This is a bit of a spoiler review of the movie. By this point of recording, the movie has been released in theaters, so if you've seen it, great. Hope you enjoyed it, and hope you enjoy this full-on discussion of it. If you have not seen it, please go out, watch it, and come back, and we can talk about some of the things that aren't given directly away and some things that are a bit of a surprise and big secrets and reveals throughout the entire movie that could be considered spoiler territory. But towards the latter half, when Bruce Wayne is making these discoveries about his family, about Thomas and Martha Wayne, his parents, who we do not see get killed, so that is one Batman trope that is not regurgitated in this film, which was a huge positive for me. I do not need to see those people killed on screen again, ever, in any portrayal of Batman ever again. It has been done to death. It's been done great. It's been done horribly. We don't need to see it anymore, and I'm glad they did not do that. They were just spoken of. They were shown images of, but other than that, they did not play that type of role in this film. So that was great. The whole buildup of this movie was we would get to see a more detective side of Batman, and I thought they did a great job of that. Batman is known as the world's greatest detective, and I thought he actually got a chance to show why he is known as the world's greatest detective. He commanded many of the scenes in which his detective skills were put on display. Early on, we see him at a crime scene for a mayor who was murdered, and we see the entire crime scene. Of course, the police are very uneasy about the Batman. He's this vigilante who is nothing but a headache, but the only person defending him is Lieutenant Jim Gordon. So he's there at the crime scene, and he's walking very slowly. He's very observant of his surroundings. He's very observant of everything around. There's one part where he just looks down and he stares and he sees, whether it's a little piece of a weapon or a blood spatter or whatever, that forensics were there. They didn't even see that. So he just stares at it, doesn't even say anything. He stares at it, walks away, and they come over and dust that and collect that as evidence. So just little things like that, little touches like that really showed how strong of a detective he was. And he's not perfect. He's not this all-knowing, always right, always dead on type of detective. He is great. He is on the money more often than not, but there are times where he does make some mistakes and he does get some things wrong, or he does misinterpret things, or he does not see the bigger picture as revealed by the Riddler towards the end of the movie, heading into the final act of the film. So I loved that. I also loved how we see the transformation of Batman from pure vigilante into a true hero, a superhero, by the end of the movie. I thought showing that was great. And so all of that was really good. But Robert Pattinson as an actor really came through in this role. So hopefully by now we are not still labeling him as just the Twilight guy, or just only seeing him in that light. He has done several other big roles. Well, not necessarily big roles, but very unique roles since then. Very wild and out there film roles that you would not expect him to take on. Movies like Good Time or The Lighthouse. And he has really shown his abilities as an actor, his range as an actor. And I thought that came into effect here. So, not the greatest Bruce Wayne early, but he eventually grew into becoming a more interesting Bruce Wayne for me. But him as the Batman, which we see a lot of throughout this film, I thought was really good. I thought Zoe Kravitz as Catwoman, Zelina Kyle, was very good in this film. A very emotional character, a lot more emotion from this character than we have seen in many of the other entries and many of the other portrayals of this character. Of course, Michelle Pfeiffer had a very tragic backstory with her, Selena Kyle, back in the 1992 Batman Returns film, Anne Hathaway in The Dark Knight Rises was not overly dramatic. She was a bit one note for me in that movie, which is why I didn't really enjoy that character portrayal all that much. But she did the most with what she was given. And so when you look at those as the main film versions of this character, of course, we've seen this character in the animated series. We saw this character in the previous Batman world in the Adam West days. So we've seen this character in different iterations, and of course the Catwoman movie with Halle Berry in 2004. But this is one of my more enjoyable portrayals of the Catwoman character on film. I thought the chemistry with her and Batman, with Zoe Kravitz and Robert Pattinson, was very good. I enjoyed the scenes with them together, the scenes of them working together, the scenes of them talking to each other. I thought they had very good chemistry with one another. They're back and forth, their differing ideologies. Usually the Batman Catwoman relationship is very back and forth, very toxic, in that they can be working together, they can be apart, they can be enemies, they can be potentially lovers. It's always up and down, very back and forth with the two of them. They do work together in this movie for the most part. They're never really against each other. They do have a difference in ideologies and how they go about getting justice and getting vengeance and those sort of things. But every time they are together, I thought that they had great chemistry, and I thought Zoe Kravitz brought a lot to this character with her backstory and the way in which she went about getting revenge against certain characters and avenging certain people close to her. So I would not mind seeing her in future films. I thought the Riddler, and maybe this is a bit of a spoiler, but actor Paul Dano is the one playing the Riddler. I'm pretty sure he's done the media circuit, and it's not a huge surprise that he is the one portraying this character. I thought this was nothing like the last time we saw the Riddler on screen in a film back in 95 with Jim Carrey in Batman Forever. He had comedic elements to him. He had this sort of personality to him that made for very comedic and over the top gestures and movements and mannerisms. But for the most part, he is a very dark and disturbing and chilling iteration of this character. The costume, the mask that he wears, and the voice and alterations to his voice that he had when communicating with people in hostage situations, or these disturbing videos that would get released to the media that he would create. I thought Paul Dano brought a very dark, chilling version of this character to the screen, and that was just with the mask on and the costume and hiding just that much secrecy behind the character. But once he is unmasked, once he is in a position where he lets himself get captured, he's placed into Arkham, and you see his face. You get to see the face of the actor himself, and you get to see this character as a real person. There is still that intensity, there is still that chilling, creepy nature of it, but now you get to see his expressions, which makes me wonder, would it have been better had they just had him without the mask, without the fake voice, and just let him be that? You see his face throughout the entire movie. Maybe you would have been able to see even more of that personality shine through, because even in those small bits towards the end of the film where we see that, part of me thought that they were strong enough to where I probably would have liked to have seen that even more throughout the entire movie. So I thought he was great, and his motivations made sense. Of course, he was an orphan, and he had many empty promises made to him as a citizen in Gotham from the people who run Gotham, including the Waynes, Thomas and Martha Wayne. There's a big plot point, there's a big reveal that the Waynes were a part of this huge corruption in the city. There's corruption and there's dirty people all throughout the entire city and throughout the history of Gotham, and Thomas and Martha Wayne are exposed as being a part of that in a way, in that while Thomas Wayne was having a mayoral campaign, he tried to have a reporter silenced who had dirt on him and his wife, in that his wife, Martha, her mother, murdered her father, Martha's father, when she was a young child. And in an attempt to not get that story leaked out, Thomas Wayne makes a deal with Carmine Falcone to handle that, which ultimately led to that reporter's death. So that blood technically is on the hands of Thomas Wayne. In doing so, he performed this act in an attempt to keep the Wayne family image clean for his mayoral campaign, and they are just as equally a part of the sketchiness and the shadiness of Gotham that the Riddler is out to tear down and bring down the very fabric of. So his scenes and his motivation and the reason why he was behaving this way and the reason for his actions all made sense. And like I said, it was just very creepy throughout the entire movie. Jeffrey Wright as Lieutenant James Gordon, I thought he did a very good job. Majority of his scenes all take place with Batman, and I thought he and Batman had very good interactions with one another, and he did a very good job. So if they do future projects with him, definitely would not mind seeing him again. Colin Farrell as Oz, or the Penguin. I don't believe he's... Actually, no, I take that back. He is referred to as the Penguin by Batman and maybe a few other people, but we don't see him in full-on Penguin mode like historically you do in the comics, or even the Batman Returns movie, which was a very dark, disturbing version of the Penguin in and of itself. This version that Colin Farrell brings is very comedic, very lighthearted, at least not really taking much things seriously. He is dirty, he is a dangerous force to be reckoned with, but he does not have this intimidating menace to his character like you see with other figures and other crime bosses that are shown in this movie, like John Turturro's Carmine Falcone. He has a very intimidating stature to him, where you see him and he's very calm, he's never really uncomposed, he's never sweating, and he is just always very reserved and calculated. And I thought John Turturro, who we see in many comedic roles, he reminded you like he can do drama and he can do that intense acting too. So I thought he brought that here. Whereas Colin Farrell, someone who is not really all that comedic and not really as over the top and bombastic in other films, he brought that here. And I thought that that brought a very enjoyable element to this character. I, at many times, lost sight of the fact that that was Colin Farrell behind all of the prosthetics, all of the makeup, and this is a brand new character. It was not just Colin Farrell playing the Penguin. I believed that that was Oz. I believed that this was the Penguin. That was a character within this film, within this story told, and lost sight of the fact that that was the actor that I know for all these other things here. So I thought the prosthetics worked on him and his character worked very well. Andy Serkis as Alfred Pennyworth doesn't really have a strong presence in this film. He's not a heavily featured character like many of the other characters that I just mentioned are, but he is used effectively when he is there in the short stints and bits of the film that he is there. He gets taken out for a long period of time, there's a period of time that goes by where he's not really an impactful player in the film and the story at all. But then there is a point in which, once the Wayne family is the target of the Riddler, Alfred gets taken out. There is an explosion in Wayne Manor that takes out Alfred, and he is placed in the hospital, and he basically remains there throughout the rest of the movie. We do see another scene with him and Bruce Wayne, and we see them talking a bit. The times that we do see that throughout the entire movie are very good. You see the connection that they have. You see the rebellious nature of Bruce Wayne against Alfred and just doing what he's doing, and obviously against the wishes of Alfred, but Alfred wanting Bruce to live up and honor the legacy of the Wayne family name, to which that is taken into question later on when all the dirt surrounding the family is released. That tests and questions Bruce's ability to want to carry on that legacy, but Alfred reinstills in him how important that is, and just how good of a man Thomas Wayne, how good of a man Bruce's father truly was, and how hard it was for him to have to take on that role of raising Bruce and trying to raise him and impart that wisdom on him when he felt as though he was not able to do so. He was not good enough to do so. So I thought the chemistry, the back and forth that we did see with Andy Serkis and Robert Pattinson in this movie worked very well. It's definitely a character that I would like to see more of in the future, in future films, and have a bit more of a role. I'm so used to Michael Gough in the original Batman series, of course, with Michael Keaton as Batman, and then Val Kilmer, and then even George Clooney. He, as Alfred, was always great. And then you fast forward to the Nolan films with Michael Caine. I thought the dialogue between him and Christian Bale was always on point and was always one of the biggest highlights of those films. And I thought he served the purpose that Alfred typically does serve for Batman and Bruce Wayne, which is being that emotional center, the understanding figure that they can confide in, they can talk to, and they can help them with. We see that here with Andy Serkis. We do see him take the bits of evidence that Batman collects, and he's trying to help decipher messages and hidden codes and hidden warnings or whatever. So he does work that to a very good degree. I would just like to see even more of that in the future. There aren't many other huge notable characters in this movie. We have a lot of DAs and we have mayors and mayoral candidates, but many of them just serve the purpose of being victims of the Riddler, and a lot of them die. A lot of them are set up to be killed or attempted to be killed, and they don't really serve any purpose beyond just being able to put out any exposition or any dialogue that is impacting our main characters in any way, whether it's Batman, Bruce Wayne, or they're doing something for the Riddler, or even Selina Kyle in her whole thing. They're just differences like that, but they don't really have a huge impact on the film. Well, a different character, the Batmobile. I thought this version of the Batmobile looked pretty cool. I think when they first introduced it in the film, it was a very cool scene, and throughout the remainder of it, whenever it is shown, I thought it looked cool. So there's that. The atmosphere, the tone of the film was very slow, very dark and brooding, very dark mood to the film. The city of Gotham itself looked very grimy and dirty. It was just a very disturbing and intense atmosphere for the entire film. There's never really a point where things lighten up and there's this brightness and there's this sunny element to it. It was very dark throughout the entire film, which I appreciated because that's Gotham. It's this city filled with corruption and dirt and filth, and so many people fed up, and so many angry, sad, and depressed people. And you see all these politicians and all of these cops and all these people in power who are just so corrupt and who are so abusive with the power that they have been given or that they have taken in many cases. And you see someone like Batman willing to do the things that he does in order to clean up this city and help these people and help the citizens take down these corrupt people. And you see why it's so important for him to work alongside people like Jim Gordon, who is not that. He is a very good person, one of very few people in this city who is good. It can be ridiculous at times, but we have seen this in the Dark Knight series. We've seen this in other iterations. We've seen this in television. We saw this with the series Gotham, just how dark and grimy the city can be. Some of my favorite scenes from the movie, we have the opening scene with Batman, the opening scene of the Riddler murdering the then mayor was very brutal and very intense. But the opening fight scene with Batman, him fighting the guys with the face paint coming off the train, even everything setting that up with the narration from Batman and how he has instilled this fear into the minds of many criminals. We see different criminal acts happening on the same night, but then when they're trying to make their escape and they're trying to get away, they come across these dark corners, these very shadowed spaces, and they're hesitant to go towards there because it's being planted in your mind that while the Batman, he cannot be everywhere, you do not know where he is, and he could be there at any point in time. So you're on your toes, you don't know what's going on. That was another heavy element of this movie. Very tense, several parts of this movie kept you on the edge of your seat, kept you guessing on how it was going to go, kept you fearful for people's lives and their well-being at certain points. I thought the scene with the DA who is strapped with a bomb to himself and he's driven into the funeral for the mayor. You see the Riddler on FaceTime talking to Batman and talking to him and doing the whole riddle thing. I thought that was great. I thought the car chase with Batman and the Penguin was excellent. I thought ending it with the shot of Batman coming out of the flames, coming out of his Batmobile, and it's shot upside down. It was the ending shot of one of the trailers heading into the film. I thought that was just brilliant. I thought it was beautifully done, and it was really great here. I thought anytime Selina Kyle and Batman were together, whether on a rooftop or any interactions between the two of them, was just great. Some of the dialogue got a little cheesy at times, a little corny, but for the most part, their back and forth it worked very well for me. I liked seeing them together. I liked seeing the two of them together. I liked seeing them talk to each other from the very moment that they first talked to each other all the way up until the end when they're going their separate ways. I enjoyed all the scenes the two of them had together. And of course, the ending with Batman taking on the role of a hero. He's saving these people. At this point, the Riddler has enacted this big plan. The city's being flooded. All these people are being flooded out of Gotham Square Garden, and he is taking the time. He sets off a flare and he's helping them out to safety. Later on, they're up on the roof. Many of them are being airlifted out to seek medical help, and we see him assisting and helping carrying people out. We see him carrying one woman who grabs onto his arm, and just that little scene right there, that's showing Batman as a hero. That's why he does it. That's why he does it, to help people, not just to get vengeance and beat up criminals and thugs and corrupt crime bosses or whatever. He is also doing it to help citizens and clear this city to be better for people. And you had an example there of him actually trying to help, and I thought that that was great. So many of the positives I have for the film falls into that category. I did like the characters. I thought the acting was great. I thought the elements of that were great. I thought the score, the theme, and the score for this film was superb. I thought it was great. Some negatives, it was a bit long. It was 2 hours and 56 minutes. I don't think it needed to be that long. I think if you go in and really focus, you could probably take certain elements out or chop certain things down so it's not that long. But I did think overall, you could not exactly feel the length of the film towards the last act, because it gets to a point where it feels like we're wrapping things up, and then something gets introduced and we're in this whole thing with certain parts of the city are blowing up and there's this flood taking out the city, and now Batman has to stop this mass group of followers that the Riddler has gained who are killing and assassinating people. That whole sequence, you probably could have cut that down. It probably was not all that necessary. It just escalated things, but it added a whole different action element to the story, and it led to Batman's big heroic part towards the end, which I did like. But around that time is when you could really feel this film going past its limits as far as length is concerned. I thought some of the dialogue did get a bit corny at times, but really nitpicky on my part. Nothing overly problematic for me. One big problem that I did have, and this is very spoilery, we see the Riddler in prison and he's freaking out because his plans are going to shit basically, and we hear another character's voice, seemingly a character in a different cell, talking to him, trying to comfort him, saying, hey, everyone loves a big comeback story and you could always bounce back from this. And this character laughs maniacally, and all I'm thinking in my head as I'm shaking my head sitting in the theater, I'm thinking, please, 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 no more Joker. I cannot take another version of the Joker in film. Can we please stop trying to put the Joker in every single Batman property? It could just be a tease. It could be something to throw us off. But with the way he was laughing, he had a very distinct laugh that can only be associated with one character. And I'm just thinking, please, no more Joker. So, there you go. Now, what can we expect with future properties, with future movies within this series now created? We could see a sequel, obviously, is almost guaranteed to come from this. I believe Penguin, and that's going to be a series spinoff, and I believe even the Gotham PD, they're going to get a spinoff for themselves. So we are going to see many of these characters again in the future. I think even Arkham is going to have its own series. So we'll see many of these characters again on HBO Max in the future. I would love to see a Catwoman spin-off series or movie at some point. I think her character is interesting enough to follow. She does part ways with Batman towards the end of the film and goes off on her own. So I would love to follow her to see where she lands and what she does. Of course, eventually coming back around. And there's no real connection with the DCEU, I believe. And I'm pretty sure that Flash movie that's going to come out later this year will basically kill the DCEU as it currently exists. But I think films like this just further show that DC can take chances with these characters. They don't have to be so wrapped up in a mindset of doing everything like Marvel and trying to build this big universe. They can take chances. We've seen that with films like Joker. We've seen that with the recent HBO Max series Peacemaker. We've seen this, and now with this movie, them taking chances, going different directions. And while a movie like this is not completely brand new, it does borrow elements from previous Batman films. It borrows elements from other action, crime, drama movies in general. But it is different enough to be good enough to stand on its own. And like I said, The Dark Knight is still my favorite movie, one of my favorite movies of all time, which by default makes it my favorite Batman movie. So this movie does not quite top that, nor does it top a few of the other Batman movies, but it is very good. It is a very strong entry in the Batman movie world, and I thought Robert Pattinson did a very admirable job as Batman in this film. Nothing completely overly bold as far as the choices are made in this film, in the direction and the characters and the action that's presented to us. Very horrific elements to this film that adds to the suspense and the thriller and the intensity of it. All of it really adds to making this film come off as much more different and unique and fresh as far as the character is concerned, and I highly recommend it. So if you have not seen this film, please do yourself a favor, go out and see it, judge for yourself, and if you have seen it, go ahead and leave a comment down below. Did you like it? Did you like the direction that they're going with this character? Did you like the villain? Do you like Robert Pattinson as Batman? Do you dislike him? Whatever your thoughts are, leave them down below. And of course, as always, if you like what you see and you like what you hear, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Twitter at DerekJ Speaks. I talk movies, I talk wrestling. In fact, as of this recording, this weekend, AEW has a huge pay-per-view coming up, Revolution. This Sunday, I will be reviewing that once it is over with, and I'm sure I will be back here for other wrestling reviews as well as movie reviews. Any other movies that I talk about, any other movies that I like or even dislike, I'll be back here to talk about all of it. So thank you for listening to me. Thank you for staying around, and hope you enjoy the movie. So see you next time.